COVID pandemic right now is a global pandemic, and if you look at some of the countries, now if you take for US for an instance, they have said that they will be COVID secure by July or August. They even think of opening up their borders. If you look at countries like New Zealand even had an event recently where there was almost 50,000 people who participated in that event. So Sri Lanka being an island with a population of around 21 million, I think we could have contained this a lot better than it is. So right now, as at today, the COVID cases reported yesterday was around 3,500. And I think during the time that we had the lockdown period, the 3 to 4 days where we had a lockdown, if you look at the COVID cases, they were all under 3,000. For about a week, the COVID cases didn't go beyond the 2,000 mark. But as soon as we opened up the country just so that the Port City bill could be passed this week, the cases have jumped to 3,500, and the health authorities that I know now, it's very strange that a new law has been enacted where doctors are not allowed to speak about COVID cases, which is because the doctors are actually people who are concerned about the public health as opposed to the politicians who are in power. So today I think we might even see the cases jumping up to 4,000, because so clearly when we had a lockdown, the number of cases that we had were a bit better. So another thing that we have to look at is the number of testing that we are doing. See, I raised this in Parliament also, that the number of tests that are done in the Eastern Province, where population of, I always speak about the Eastern Province because I have the numbers, not that I'm only concerned about the Eastern Province, but I have a better knowledge of the numbers. So with a population of 2 million, we only do 500 tests per day. And on top of that, the results of, we do 1,000 tests a day in the East, the entire Eastern Province, of which only 500 results are released every day, because that's all that the capacity is that's in the Eastern Province. Only one PCR testing, a machine that could issue results in the entire Eastern Province. So are we really talking about real numbers? Is 3,500 an actual number? No, I'm pretty sure that we have so many more cases, and it's very sad because if you look at the first cluster, I always say first wave, I said that it was to have the elections. That if we had, because Parliament's term was only supposed to end in August or September, the 5-year term. So if it wasn't like that this was a huge crisis where democracy was to make sure that democracy prevails, that we have to have a election. I would understand if the term had ended, but this was just sheer selfishness, sheer greed for power. They didn't want to, because most of the policies that the president, presidents used during the president's campaign, president knew, and the team around the president knew that they couldn't sustain them, because most of these promises that they gave out were false promises. So if they had waited till August, they probably wouldn't have even secured 140 something seats that they got. 2/3 would have been a challenge. And on top of various other reasons, like alliances with SLFP might have not happened, because I don't know, I don't know how true this is, but I was even told that in Polonnaruwa district, Maithripala Sirisena, the chairman of the SLFP, had signed the nominations, and after he signed nominations, they refused nominations that were agreed in other districts. So because Maithripala Sirisena had signed these nomination papers, they were able to submit them, and some of the promises that they had made to their alliance partners in different districts about the proportion in which they share seats under the SLPP symbol, they had reduced. So for an example, this is just an example, if they had promised SLFP 5 seats in Anuradhapura, since Maitri had signed in Polonnaruwa, since the party chairman had signed, after he signed, they had said, okay, no, we'll only give you 3 now. So there were rumors like this. I don't have any proof to substantiate my claims, but see, these sort of selfish attitudes was what caused the first wave. But it was only about 20 deaths at the time. I'm not taking 20 deaths lightly, but there was far worse impact on the economy. The economy completely collapsed because we were under lockdown for nearly 40 odd days. So if we had managed it properly, if we had gone for a lockdown straight away, I saw the health minister kissing this Chinese patient, saying, she was cured, and she wasn't even wearing a mask when she kissed that, and she was asking me to wear a mask at Parliament most recently. And when she kissed a first corona patient who recovered, she wasn't even wearing. What a great example she said to the entire country. So then the second wave, was to do with the 20th Amendment. President knew that Minuwangoda cluster had come, and it was very funny. People were identified in Galle, Hambantota, Batticaloa, Jaffna, everywhere, and somehow they all brought a connection to them, made a connection to them being part of the Palliagoda fish market cluster or the Minuwangoda Brandix cluster. By that time it was very evident that it had already gone into the spread into the community. But again, we didn't go for a lockdown at the time. We went for a little period of lockdown after 20th Amendment was passed. So again, that's a sheer greed for power, because I think President thought, if he lets it go too far, any of these agreements that he had come to with his alliance partners may not, they'll have more time to think, or I don't know, whatever leverage that they used, like twisting arms that they did, might have not worked. So and then we lost about 500 people. And then now again, third wave, last week we saw Friday, Saturday, Sunday was under lockdown. But then Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday, we were supposed to have the second reading of the Port City Bill. And if we had passed the Port City Bill during last Parliament sittings, I think the last couple of weeks would have been under lockdown. And when Port City's second reading was supposed to be taken up, when Supreme Court's determination hadn't come, I think it was on the 18th or the 19th. No, sorry. Whenever the determination was supposed to come, if they had locked down, maybe we could have contained the cases to under 2,000 per day. It wouldn't have jumped up to about 3,500 now. So again, to get this bill passed, now we are going to go for a lockdown from the next 10 days. Why were we open then? Just to get Port City passed? You think Port City is what entire country's utmost priority is Port City? It's just whatever. I've been various rumors, various articles I've been reading about how people are already running, in a frantic to get these commission deals signed off now since the Port City bill is passed. So overall, I think just like with all the other aspects in this government, the way they've handled Port City has been an absolute failure, and it's disgusting to see our leaders, not my leader, but leaders that most people, 6.9 million people voted for a certain leader. It's disgusting to see that this leader is far more concerned about power for himself and power for his political party as opposed to the welfare and the safety of the government. So that's my take on the Port City, and I really want to urge the people to look after their safety, because I don't think this government is able to ensure that we are all safe. It's ridiculous. I saw Keheliya Rambukwella, media spokesperson, cabinet spokesperson, telling people to be more careful. But then if you open up, if the country is not under lockdown, private sector is of course is going to expect their employees to come to work, because it's not mandatory. So, and with the amount of limited transport that we have, public transport we have, how are people supposed to be more cautious? They'll end up getting late to work and they'll get pay cuts. So it's really responsible of senior people like him in the government to put the blame on to public when they're the ones to blame. So militarization, if you look at ministry secretaries, the health ministry secretary is I think a retired army person. If you look at all the most important ministries and secretaries for ministries and key positions, there are ex-military officials. I mean, the fact that leave the north aside, north's heavy militarization. If you look at Colombo, with the militarization, if you look at most ministry secretaries or actual key positions, I think even I think People's Bank or some bank or financial institution also is headed by the chairman is a military person, if I'm not mistaken. So militarization in the north, leave that aside, but during COVID lockdown periods, you see 6 or 7 or 8 motorbikes, parading around Colombo with guns. I think what they are trying to shoot COVID out, or I don't understand the logic. You should have PHIs and health authorities probably trying to, or even police for that matter, public law and order police, just staying out there, police bikes going around to ensure that people are inside. These are just stunts that they show people, and it's also really disturbing that the military website, the Sri Lanka Army website, has made music videos for them, and videos like it's almost like trailers for Tamil movies, where they run around, they ride around Colombo in motorbikes with guns, trying to fight COVID. So, see, my fear is that that the rate that this government is becoming unpopular, people in power, it will be so hard for them to let go of power. They'll be in power. So my fear is that if they are not be able to democratically get themselves elected next time, would they look at a military rule? I saw that Sri Lankan government in the past had recognized the Myanmar's illegal junta government. I mean, when most of the countries hadn't even acknowledged that, I think our foreign minister had gone ahead and congratulated that government or sent a message on Twitter. So does that mean that our government is going down that path, or even may go down that path if the need came to, if the need comes to that. So, and also the military is building hospitals. It's when makeshift hospitals are made, politicians are going to open them as if they were some schools. We should be ashamed that we are in that level where we have to come up with makeshift hospitals. If I was in power, I'd try to hide the fact that that we are hurriedly building makeshift hospitals. And you see this 10,000 bed project. 10,000 bed project. If we should have come up with a better system to quarantine. Quarantine itself has become huge mafia. So many people who come from the Middle East. I feel so sorry for them. They worked there for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and then they were due to come to Sri Lanka for various reasons. Parents being sick, siblings getting married, them getting married, or medical treatment. These are not people who lived in the West. These are people who worked as domestic aides at home, at houses in the Middle East, or at drivers, or just have worked 12-hour shifts in construction sites, and their entire savings for the 3 years would have been around 300,000 to 400,000 rupees. So generally they work there, they come back. As soon as they come back, the trend is they buy a motorbike, and then the rest of the money that they had, they try to start up something small to stand up on their own feet. But this government has even taken that money away from them. So when they leave the Middle Eastern country, Qatar or Saudi Arabia, they are told that they will be taken to a quarantine center, not a paid quarantine center. And once they come here, they are just manipulated, where they don't have a choice, but they agree to go to a paid hotel quarantine center, where they end up spending about 200,000 rupees of their savings. And these poor children, I mean, I can't call them children, poor brothers and sisters have worked nearly 2 to 3 years to save this money. So militarization on one side, but then using the military, the fear, if there were health authorities or police or whoever, I think these people who come also would, at least try to, speak up for themselves. But you put the military there, especially youngsters from the north and the east, they have a little fear when they say military, because there are complaints of people who've gone missing in the past. During the last stage of the war, there are so many. This is why Tamil politicians and the Tamils are asking for these to be investigated into, because there are various witnesses come forward, statements are made saying that they went and handed over their brothers or their husbands to the military, and today they are no more, and the government is merely saying that these stories are fabricated. So if they're not fabricated, if you think they're fabricated, go ahead and investigate these claims, and then we can all know the truth. But they don't want to do that. So these youth who come down, they're worried about the military also. So my fear is that one day we all may wake up and that there is some military person is in charge of the country. What do we do next? I mean, that's probably not going to happen for the next few years, because there's power is there. But what if that comes to a point where the government gets so unpopular that they are unable to, that they don't even stand a chance of getting elected. I don't think they have a chance of re-electing a president, this particular party. But if they don't even stand a chance of getting a simple minority in the parliament, don't know what they go to. So we all Sri Lankans have to be cautious, because I think as Sri Lankans, we are also very arrogant people. I mean, as a country, Tamil, Sinhala, Muslim, we are not very submissive. We are not going to be submissive. So I don't know how we will react to a military rule. I don't think we can ever, because we don't value democracy. In China, you don't have Facebook, no Instagram. Even China, there's no social media. It's all their own thing, right? So I don't think Sri Lankans will be able to live under such conditions, because we're used to democracy. So this is my fear with militarization, and the signs. These are warning signs. That's what I would say. So transitional justice is really important in reconciliation, and I haven't studied the actual figures in the budget where allocations have been made to the Office of Missing People and all that. But overall, these government's actions are far from a government that is interested in reconciliation. It is more of a government that is more keen in stirring more, hatred amongst communities, more polarization. That is what's happening. So I'm not surprised if they haven't allocated money for the Office of Missing Persons or anything to do with reconciliation. But see, human rights is something completely different to reconciliation. Human rights are something that is, that should be respected irrespective of reconciliation or not. Human rights are for everybody. Human rights are not just for Tamils or Sinhalese or the Muslims. Human rights are for everybody in this country. See, Mahinda Rajapaksa, when he was in the opposition in the early 70s or late 70s, he was the first person who went to the Human Rights Commission and complained about the atrocities committed by the Janata Vimukti Peramuna insurrection at the time. So when he went in front of the Human Rights Commission, that was a body that was, that was impartial, and that could be somewhere that Sri Lankans could go to get justice. But in today's context, Human Rights Commission human rights itself has been made into this scary monster amongst Sri Lankans. So, ඔය මානව හිමිකම් කොමිසම ඉස්සරහට ගිහිල්ලා ලංකාව පාගන. I mean, what is there to betray Sri Lanka in front of the Human Rights Commission? Human Rights Commission is to protect human rights. So, see, for an example, I tried to rationalize this with some people. When people were killed in Ratupaswala, when they asked for water, that was a gross violation of their human rights. When people were killed in Velikada, the prison, that was a violation of the human rights of the prisoners. Even recently, when I think the Mahara, it was in Mahara, I think, where the prison, there's some shootout happened. We still don't know what exactly went on there, but their human rights, basic human rights were violated. So likewise, the Muslim Janasa burial issue was not just for Muslims. I mean, since the Janasa burial has been lifted, Hindus have buried them, their families there, loved ones there. Christians have buried their loved ones there. And in fact, there's a couple of Sinhala people who died also have chosen to bury their bodies, because when you die, some people decide to donate their body to medical science, some people decide to get their bodies cremated, some people want their ashes to be washed away in the sea. I mean, some people, Sinhala, Tamil, Muslim, may want to be buried, but this was completely made into something human rights thing against the Muslims. Burial shouldn't be allowed. As I said this in Paya, I'm ashamed that as a Sri Lankan, I'm ashamed that that we have other fellow Sri Lankans who think like that. So human rights is for everybody, and human rights should be respected, and we should all work towards promoting human rights. And the Human Rights Council is only a body that recommends certain recommendations to ensure the quality of life in the country. That he heard this loud noise to see Chinese were celebrating Chinese New Year lighting firecrackers, neighbors. So this is what this country has come to, and we need to be very cautious. And I think yesterday was, in my opinion, one of the darkest days in the history of Sri Lanka. Well, the only difference I would say is that Sri Lankans today, Sri Lankan Tamils today, politicians, parliamentarians, political parties, what we are asking is for devolution of power. We are asking for power that is vested, so much power that is vested in the central government, to be vested in provincial governments. That is a start. I mean, provincial council is just a starting step for devolution, which needs to be strengthened more. And see, provincial councils are in all 9 provinces of the Sri Lanka. Provincial councils are not something that is only in the north and the east. There is a southern provincial council, there's a western provincial council, there's a central provincial council, right? So that's what the Tamil politicians are asking for. We are Sri Lankans. We've lived in this country for as long as everybody else has. It's this misconception that Tamils were brought into this country from India. I mean, with this estate sector, some people think that all Tamils were brought in by the British. That's not true. There were Sri Lankan Tamils lived in this country before. So the difference here is that Chinese have been given a territory, as opposed to, and we still don't even know who's going to live there, right? And I was told that there's going to be border control. So if you were to buy something at Port City, when you come into Sri Lanka, you get taxed. So that means, and also most of the laws that are going to be there are ambiguous. What has happened yesterday is we have given all the powers to a commission which could have Chinese nationals on the commission. So what has happened yesterday is that we have passed the Port City bill, where we have given permission, all powers to a commission which could have even Chinese nationals on it, along with Sri Lankans or just Chinese, the power to decide what happens within that area. It's all ambiguous. We don't know. They could come up with what they want to do within that premises. So, and also if you look at the Tamils who fought for Tamil Eelam, the LTT that fought for Tamil Eelam, look at the numbers. Are you going to compare LTT to China and the amount of money? And they have different leverage that the LTT didn't have. LTT had a claim saying that they fought for a separate state on the basis that that was the homeland of the Tamils, and that injustices were done to the Tamils. See, from 1948 up until late 70s, it took 30 years for the Tamils to take up arms, the Tamil youth to take up arms. Before that, democratically, they tried to achieve their political rights. From 1949, when our party, I represent the Ilangai Tamil Arasuk Katchi, when our party leader, Mr. S.J.V. Selvanayagam, formed the party, his principle was devolution of power. One country, will share power, whereas, so matters that affect the north and the east, such as not not matters that pertain to like international relations or foreign policy, but local matters within the area that we will. So like, let's say land allocation, who is going to cultivate this land? Landless people from that area would have been identified. I mean, so it's a mechanism where people who are minority in numbers have a sense of political power, where they can choose what's best for them. Whereas in a central government, there is no way that a community that's a minority in numbers could even think of voicing up. We are not even allowed to speak at parliament without getting disturbed. So with the Chinese, it's not like that. They have put money, they have trapped us with money, they have so much leverage, and they are a superpower. They have so much wealth. If they wanted, when they want to take over this part, whenever Sri Lanka is, Sri Lankans start saying, okay, no, we want it back, that is when that will be Chilam. So whereas Elam was different, because people who lived in this country fought for their political rights 30 years later. Chinese are not like that. They just put money, trapped us. Now they are going to use leverage. As soon as we start opposing it, they will say, okay, then give us some money back. Give the money back. And we are not going to have any way to give money back. No other country is going to come and bail us out, because why would America or India or Japan or any other country want 269 hectares on the Indian Ocean that's filled? I mean, that doesn't serve a purpose for anybody else other than somebody who wants to create a military base. Well, 13th Amendment hasn't still been implemented fully, which is why it looks like a administrative structure or a political structure that is not efficient, because you keep all the powers with the center and you have a bogus institution in the provinces. See, we do have a double entry system. We do have education ministry in the center and we do have education ministry in the province, because the center is holding on to the resources, not strengthening the provincial council. So naturally, since the inception of the provincial council system through the 13th Amendment, the central government has been trying to undermine the provincial government, so that it looks like a failed project. See, I think when the 13th Amendment was brought in, I don't think even the Tamils wanted it. They said that wasn't enough, right? So we need to strengthen the 13th Amendment. We need to, fully implement the 13th Amendment first, and then we need to strengthen it. And so this is a way. This is at least this. But see, this is already in our constitution. 13th Amendment is part of our constitution. That's a law. I mean, you can't just get rid of law like that. And there will be implications also. If you try to get rid of, an international agreement. See, in up until 1987. Till the 13th Amendment was enacted, all Tamil political parties, their political view was that we need a separate state. And once 13th Amendment was passed, they said, okay, look, now there is some stepping stone, we'll work towards devolution of power. So from late 1940s to 70s or early 80s till the war started, Tamil political parties asked for a political solution within a united Sri Lanka. Late 70s, they decided, right, this is not going to work. We have to ask for a separate state. And then you took up arms. And then with the 13th Amendment, the political parties again said, okay, look, there's something's happened now. There's 13th Amendment there. Let's work from this. Work towards devolution. But still, the militants still fought. But the political parties agreed upon that. Some people say, now that the war is not there, 13th Amendment should be taken away. Now that the war is not there, the war started because the political solution wasn't given. 13th Amendment didn't come, war didn't come because of 13th Amendment. 13th Amendment came because of war. And why did the war happen? because political rights were not given. So a lot of people are under the misconception now that since the war is over, there is no issue, no, all issues have been resolved, we can all live, no, that's not the truth. For us to ensure that there is never a situation like what we have faced in the past 30-40 years, we need to respect everybody's political values, and also respect for everybody to have a sense of ownership in the political structure. So till we achieve that, I think we will always be a failed state. Well, we will have to push for it. First, we'll have to push for provincial elections to happen. It hasn't happened since 2017, most provincial councils. So first we will have to push to get the provincial elections to happen, and we will do that in the near future. Provincial election needs to be held, and then we will take it forward from there. High level corruption, then I think presidential secretariat should be fired first, right? We'll start from there, and then we'll talk about the rest, because I mean, corruption and Sri Lankan political authorities, just like they go hand in glove, from a local government chairman up to the presidential secretariat. There are allegations, right? Even the sand mafia, there are allegations that someone connected to the presidential secretariat is involved. I don't know these allegations. So so that this is just a lame excuse, a sore loser's excuse to say something bad about just provincial councils. Then we'll have to dissolve all things and not have democracy.